The wind howled against the windows like a warning, rattling the glass of the office that overlooked the city below. He stood there, frozen. Not because of the cold. Not because of fear. But because of the little girl standing in the doorway. Her eyes were wide, her hair braided in a way that seemed oddly familiar. In her hands, she held a drawing, a man in a suit holding hands with a little girl under a tree full of pink blossoms. She stepped forward and asked softly, "Are you my dad?" Everything in him collapsed. Michael Callahan, a man who had built his name on power, logic, and order, felt the floor beneath his feet become liquid. This couldn't be happening. His heart pounded against his ribs, trying to escape. He opened his mouth but found no words, only breath. His assistant had said there was a girl waiting outside. He thought it was a mistake. A prank. A case of wrong identity. But now that she stood in front of him, something inside him cracked. She looked just like her. No. That couldn't be. He took a step forward, and she didn't move. Instead, she held the drawing higher, as if that single image could prove what words couldn't. The blossom tree behind them was the same one from a park in Boston, a place he hadn't been to in almost a decade. The man in the picture wore a gray suit, his exact outfit that day. He remembered because he hated that tie. And the little girl. The girl in the drawing had the same freckle under her left eye as the one standing before him now. Michael's knees gave out and he sank into the leather chair behind his desk, unable to hold himself upright. He gestured to the girl with trembling fingers. Who gave you this?" She shrugged, not in confusion but like someone who'd answered this question too many times. "Mom said you might not remember." "That's okay." She said the heart remembers even when the brain forgets. His stomach clenched. That voice. It was gentle but carried a certainty beyond her years. She had to be what, 7? 8? Her shoes were too big, like she was wearing a stranger's hopes. Her coat was thin. Her eyes, though, were made of storms. Michael reached into his drawer and pulled out an old photo, one he hadn't looked at in 6 years. It was faded, creased, the ink bleeding in the corners. It was of her. Emily. The woman he had once loved in secret. The one he let go without a word. She had disappeared without a goodbye. And he had buried her memory under 1,000 deals, deadlines, and boardroom wars. But now, as he looked from the photo to the child, he realized he hadn't buried anything. He had merely shut a door. And now it had been kicked open by a voice that called him Dad. His hand shook as he pressed a button on the intercom. "Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the day." There was silence on the other end. Then a quiet, "Yes, Mr. Callahan." He leaned forward. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She bit her lip, then said it softly, as if revealing a spell. "Lila. Lila Wren." He closed his eyes. Wren. Emily's favorite bird. She used to sketch them on napkins when they waited for coffee. He remembered how she once said, "Wrens build homes anywhere. Even in broken walls. They believe in starting over." He opened his eyes again, and Lila was still there, as real as anything. He didn't know whether to hug her or run from her. This wasn't a surprise. It was a reckoning. He had chosen not to be a father once. He had told himself it was for the best. That Emily was better off without his world. His name. His scars. But now that child stood in front of him, not as a punishment, but as a question. Would he answer? He rose slowly, walked to her, and knelt down until they were eye to eye. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Does your mom know you're here?" She nodded. "She said if I ever needed you, I should go to the tallest building in the city and ask for Michael Callahan. And then I'd find the man who once saved her life." He blinked back the tears that threatened to fall. Saved her life. He hadn't saved anyone. If anything, he had ruined the best thing that ever happened to him. He looked at the child again. But maybe he had one last chance to get it right. Michael whispered, "Would you like something to eat?" Lila nodded quickly. "Mom says I like blueberry pancakes just like her. Do you like them too?" His breath caught. "Yeah. I do." And in that moment, a part of him, something long buried under steel and silence, began to thaw. He took her hand, warm and small, and led her out of the office. And as they stepped into the elevator, the city lights blinking below like old memories trying to return, Michael Callahan realized the story he thought was over had just begun again. Because sometimes, being called Dad isn't about the blood in your veins. It's about the way a little girl looks at you and makes you believe you still have time to become the man she thinks you are. 6 years earlier, the city looked nothing like it did now. It was softer somehow, not yet carved by regret or heavy with unanswered questions. The corners of the skyline hadn't seemed so sharp, the shadows not so long. Back then, Richard Grant wasn't yet the man who stood frozen in a cemetery. He was simply a rising corporate star with a heart locked behind layers of polished manners and measured ambitions. It was on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind where nothing felt destined, that his path crossed with the one person who would forever change the direction of his life, even if he didn't know it at the time. He had stepped into the bookstore not for romance, not even for a book, but to escape the rain. She was there behind the counter, laughing softly with a customer, her dark hair tied in a messy knot, a smudge of ink on her hand. Her name tag read, Sophie. He wouldn't remember that until years later, but in that moment, something flickered, something unfamiliar and unsettling. He had only meant to ask for directions. But then she looked up. And her eyes, wide and gentle, didn't just meet his, they seemed to read something he hadn't even written. Their conversation was brief. She pointed him toward the cafe next door, warning him about the slippery pavement. He thanked her, and before he turned to leave, she added, "If you're headed downtown, they're closing the main bridge. Might want to go the long way." He paused. No one warned him about detours. No one spoke to him without calculation. But she did, without hesitation, like it was the most natural thing in the world. As he stepped outside, he found himself glancing back once more through the rain-streaked glass. She didn't see him. She was helping someone else already, laughing again, as if the universe hadn't just nudged its elbow into the heart of time. That night, he returned. Claimed he was looking for a book, any book. She was there again. This time, her fingers were stained with blueberry ink, and she was humming a tune he didn't recognize. They talked. Not much, but more than strangers usually do. She had a way of making silence feel safe. When he mentioned he worked in finance, her nose scrunched slightly. "Sounds exhausting," she said. He laughed, genuinely, maybe for the first time in months. And then the rain returned, heavier this time, trapping them inside. She offered tea, he accepted. The clock stopped mattering. He didn't notice until the lights began to dim and she said, almost apologetically, "I think they're closing soon." Outside, he offered to walk her to the train. She declined at first, but then changed her mind. "Only if you don't mind getting soaked," she said, lifting her face to the sky. They walked under one umbrella that did very little to keep them dry. The wind was unforgiving, the city loud, yet somehow the world around them had gone quiet. At the station steps, she looked at him with something unreadable in her eyes. "Most people don't come back," she said softly. He replied without thinking, "Then I'm not most people." And just like that, the night folded itself into memory, filed neatly in a place neither of them had named yet. They didn't exchange numbers. He didn't ask where she lived. She didn't ask if he'd return. There was no promise, no goodbye heavy with meaning. Just a parting glance, just long enough to feel like a thread had been tied. And yet, something unspoken lingered. He went back again the following week, and again the week after that. Always with a new excuse. A book, a question, a coffee. She was there, always there, as if the universe had paused just long enough for them to become familiar. They laughed more. Shared little things. He learned she liked old poetry and hated sugar in her tea. She learned he had a sister he hadn't called in months and a tendency to avoid eye contact when nervous. Still, they stayed on the edge of something unnamed. Close enough to feel it. Too far to define it. Then came the night he showed up and she was gone. The shop was closed early. A sign on the door read, "Emergency. Will return tomorrow." He waited outside for hours. The rain came again, a cruel repetition. He left a note, folded inside a copy of her favorite poem. "Hope is the thing with feathers," he had underlined. No reply. No call. The next day, she still wasn't there. The next week, the store had a new clerk. Months passed. He told himself it was nothing. Just a phase. A passing connection. But the truth was, every time it rained, he remembered the night she let him walk her home. Every time he saw an old bookstore, he slowed down. Every time someone asked him if he believed in fate, he hesitated. And then, he forgot. Or he convinced himself he did. Until the girl called him Dad. Until the same eyes looked up at him from a child's face. Until the weight of everything he never said came crashing through his carefully constructed life. And it all started with rain. And a girl. In a bookstore. Who never asked for anything except directions, and maybe, unknowingly, for someone to stay. The room was too quiet for a child to grow up in. That's the first thing people would notice if they ever stepped into that small, rented apartment above the laundromat. The air held a stillness that didn't belong to youth. Yet somehow, life persisted there, small, tender, and persistent. A girl with unruly curls hummed to herself as she colored with broken crayons on the cracked kitchen tile. Her mother, still in her work uniform, sat nearby, peeling potatoes with a dull blade that took twice the time it should have. The woman's hands were calloused, her back always a little bent, but she smiled every time the girl spoke. "Mama," the child asked, eyes not leaving her sketchbook, "do you think clouds have feelings?" The woman looked up. Her name was Sophie. Her voice was soft when she answered. "Maybe. I think some clouds get heavy when they're sad." The girl nodded like that made perfect sense. Then, after a moment, she added, "That's why they cry, right?" Sophie didn't answer right away. Her hand paused, holding the half-peeled potato like it suddenly weighed too much. Then she said, "Yes, baby. That's why." That girl was named Ava. She had just turned 5. And she didn't know who her father was. Not because her mother refused to tell her, but because her mother didn't know how to. Sophie had raised Ava on a threadbare routine stitched together by double shifts, borrowed clothes, and the soft resilience only a woman completely alone could understand. She never asked for help, not from neighbors, not from friends, not even from the government. Not because of pride. But because some stories are too fragile to explain. Too easy to misunderstand. Especially when you're still trying to understand it yourself. The man she remembered, the one with storm-colored eyes and a strange softness when he smiled, he had disappeared like fog at dawn. No note. No explanation. Just, gone. She had waited, of course. 4 weeks. Then months. Until the waiting turned into a dull ache, then a scar she stopped touching. The bookstore closed. She moved on. Or at least, she tried to. But Ava came. A quiet miracle wrapped in morning sickness and fear. And Sophie didn't know whether to hate or thank the man who had left her with so much, and with nothing. For years, she told herself it was better this way. Simpler. She imagined he had his reasons. Maybe he had forgotten her. Maybe he never meant any of it. Maybe it was just a story she told herself on cold nights. Until the day she saw his face again. It wasn't in person. It was on a glossy magazine cover, sitting neatly inside the waiting room of the hotel where she cleaned floors. Richard Grant, the man who built an empire from silence, the headline read. She didn't breathe for a full 10 seconds. Her hands trembled. She wanted to throw the magazine across the room. But her eyes wouldn't stop scanning his face. The same jawline. The same eyes. The same quiet storm. She took the magazine home. Ava found it under the bed a week later. "Is this my daddy?" the girl asked innocently. Sophie's throat closed. She didn't answer. Instead, she said, "Let's make pancakes." From that day on, Sophie lived in quiet torment. Not because she wanted him back, but because the man in the magazine didn't look like someone who had simply forgotten. He looked haunted. Lonely, even. She couldn't explain it, but she felt it in her chest. A tether. And with each day Ava grew, the resemblance deepened. Not just in appearance, but in the way she tilted her head when confused. The way she clenched her tiny fists when upset. The way she looked up at the sky when it rained. It was becoming harder to pretend there were no pieces missing. Then came the envelope. No name. Just a logo. Lancaster Corporation. She almost threw it out, thinking it was junk mail. But something made her open it. Inside was an offer. A cleaning contract. Better pay. Longer hours. Prestige location, the new Lancaster headquarters downtown. Sophie laughed bitterly. Of course. Of all places. She almost said no. But Ava needed new shoes. And the heater in the apartment was wheezing. And the truth was, Sophie was tired of running from ghosts. She took the job. The first time she walked into that building, she thought she might faint. Every glass wall, every polished floor reflected parts of her past she had tried to erase. She kept her head down. She moved like she didn't exist. That was safer. Then, one morning, she passed him in the elevator. They didn't speak. He didn't look at her. But something shifted. His brow furrowed. His hand hesitated as he pressed the button. Sophie's breath caught. She stood 1 inch from a man who had once kissed her under a leaking canopy, his hand tangled in her wet hair. But now she was just a cleaner. And he was wearing a suit worth more than her monthly salary. The elevator stopped. She exited first. He stayed behind. And for hours afterward, her hands couldn't stop shaking. That night, Ava asked, "Why are you sad, Mommy?" Sophie didn't answer. She just pulled the girl close and kissed the top of her head. The next day, she was assigned to clean the executive floor. Again, she saw him. Again, no words. But this time, she saw him pause. He stared at something on his desk. A drawing. Crayons. A sun with 3 figures beneath it, one small, 2 tall. A child's messy scrawl beneath it, "Me and Mommy and the man from the magazine." Sophie hadn't put it there. Ava had tucked it into her coat pocket the week before. She must have dropped it. He picked it up. His hand trembled. And Sophie froze. In that moment, he looked straight at her. He didn't say a word. But his eyes. They looked like they were trying to remember everything at once. And failing. He stared at the drawing for a long time, like it held a code only he could break. The crayon lines wobbled and bent, but the emotion in them was unmistakable. A child's world, simple and hopeful. A sun drawn with too many rays. A stick figure with a bow in her hair labeled, "Mommy." A smaller figure in the middle with a crooked smile. And on the other side, him. Or at least, who she imagined him to be. Richard didn't move. Sophie stood frozen by the glass wall, holding the cleaning cloth like it might shield her from something ancient and unfinished. She thought he might throw the picture away. He didn't. Instead, he placed it gently in a drawer. When he looked up, she'd already turned away, pretending to clean the same fingerprint that had long disappeared from the steel railing. But she could feel his gaze on her back. Not heavy. Not angry. Just searching. That night, she couldn't sleep. Ava had crawled into bed with her, arms flung wide, as if dreaming she could fly. Sophie stared at the ceiling, wondering if the drawing had pulled something loose in him. A thread of memory. A ripple of recognition. Or maybe, just maybe, a whisper of the man she used to know. The next morning, a note was waiting at the front desk. Office 47A. 9 a.m., just to talk. R. She stared at it like it might catch fire. The handwriting wasn't printed. It was slanted, with a small loop on the R, exactly like the post-it note he'd once left for her outside the bookstore cafe, the one that read, "You forgot your umbrella. Come back when you want to forget the world." She almost didn't go. Almost. But at 8:59, she stood outside the door. Her hand hovered over the knob. And when she opened it, he was already standing. He didn't smile. Neither did she. They just stood there for a second, two people carrying 6 years of silence like a weight between them. He gestured toward the chair across from him. She sat slowly, her heart knocking against her ribs like a bird desperate to be freed. "I didn't put that drawing there," she said before he could speak. "I know," he replied. Silence again. Not awkward, just too full. Like there wasn't enough air in the room for both of them to breathe at once. "She's mine," he said suddenly. Not a question. A statement torn from somewhere raw. Sophie looked at him then. Really looked. There were lines on his face that hadn't been there before. A tiredness in his eyes. But there was also something else, a question he didn't know how to ask. "She is," Sophie whispered. He closed his eyes. His breath caught. "I didn't know," he murmured. "I swear to you. I didn't know." Sophie nodded slowly. "I believe you." And she did. Because there was no calculation in his voice. No smooth rehearsed apology. Just a man learning, in real time, that a part of him had been living without him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Her throat tightened. "You left." "I never meant to," he said quickly. "There was an emergency. My father had a heart attack the night after that night. I flew back to New York. I didn't even have your number. I didn't know how to find you." And then, he shook his head, biting back 1,000 unfinished sentences. "I didn't think you wanted to be found," Sophie said softly. "I thought you forgot me," he said, almost childlike. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then he reached into his desk and pulled out a tiny silver charm. A crescent moon on a chain. "I kept this," he said. "It was yours. You left it behind when you ran into that taxi. I found it the next day. And I've had it ever since." She hadn't known. She thought she'd lost it forever. Their eyes met. For the first time since they were two strangers huddled under the bookstore's broken awning, something unspoken passed between them, recognition, grief, wonder. And fear. "Does she know?" he asked finally. Sophie shook her head. "She knows you're someone special. She calls you the man in the magazine." He let out a half laugh, half sigh. "That's a lot to live up to." "She doesn't care about your money," Sophie said. "She just wants to know why her drawings never come back with answers." That made him pause. "Would you," he began, then stopped. "Would you let me meet her? Not as some stranger in a suit. Just as me. I don't even know what that looks like anymore. But I'd like to try." Sophie didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands. They were rough, tired, but still capable of holding hope. She has your eyes, she said. And your stubbornness. If you come into her life, you can't leave again. I won't, he said. She looked at him again. Then maybe you should come for dinner. He blinked. Tonight? No, she smiled, just a little. You'll need to stop being a CEO for a second first. Try the grocery store. Pick out a stuffed animal. A cheap one. And don't wear that tie. He looked down at it. Then laughed. It was the first real laugh she'd heard from him in 6 years. The grocery store was smaller than he remembered. Or maybe it was just the lighting, harsh fluorescence flickering above aisles stacked with reality, not reputation. Richard moved slowly, his steps unsure. He had closed multi-million-dollar deals with men who wore teeth like armor, yet he stood frozen in front of a shelf of plush toys, staring at a pink elephant with a crooked ear as if it might bite him. Children passed him with sticky fingers and wild laughter. No one recognized him here. No suits. No cameras. No glass boardrooms reflecting his hollow victories. Just the simple weight of choosing the right stuffed animal for a little girl he barely knew but somehow already loved. He reached for the elephant. Paused. Then picked up a small blue whale with a lopsided grin and stitched-on eyes. It reminded him of something, or someone. Imperfect. A little lost. But trying. The cashier didn't even glance up. $3.99, she mumbled, bored. He handed over a crisp 20. No change. Keep it. She blinked, but said nothing. That night, he stood outside the apartment Sophie had texted him the address to. The hallway smelled of cheap detergent and boiled vegetables. There were drawings taped to the walls, rainbows, hearts, one with a dog that looked more like a potato. He held the toy whale like it was sacred. When the door opened, he almost dropped it. Ava stood there in a t-shirt too big for her, one sock half off her foot, a crayon still smudged on her cheek. She looked up at him with the kind of boldness only children possess. "Are you the man from the magazine?" she asked. "I guess I am," he replied. She narrowed her eyes. "You look taller in the picture." He laughed. "Everyone does." She let him in. The apartment was small but warm. Worn furniture, soft light, a faint smell of cinnamon. A slow song played from a dusty speaker in the corner, Billie Holiday or maybe something older, something aching. Sophie came out of the kitchen drying her hands on a towel, trying not to look nervous. "We made spaghetti," she said, as if it were a peace offering. He held up the whale. "I brought a guest." Ava took it solemnly, stared into its stitched eyes, then hugged it hard. "He's mine now." "Yours forever," Richard said. They sat at the table. Ava told stories with wild hand gestures and occasional mouthfuls of spaghetti. Richard listened like every word mattered. Sophie mostly watched. Not just him, but the way he watched her daughter. He asked questions. Not about school or grades. About drawings. Dreams. Why Ava liked whales. "Because they're big, but quiet," she said. "And they remember things for a long time." His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He looked at Sophie. She looked away. After dinner, Ava disappeared into the bedroom with her new whale. Sophie poured 2 glasses of tea, the way she used to do at the bookstore cafe, back when the world was simpler and hearts hadn't been broken yet. "Thank you for this," Richard said quietly. Sophie nodded. "She deserves to know someone like you." "I'm not sure she would, if she really knew me." "Maybe not," Sophie said. "But you're not the same man anymore." He looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because the man I knew wouldn't have come back." She didn't mean it as a compliment. But maybe it was one. There was a silence between them. Heavy but not suffocating. Like the air before a storm, not dangerous, just honest. "I was so angry at you," she said suddenly. "For so long. Not because you left. But because I let myself believe you meant to stay. I did. Then why didn't you?" He swallowed. "Life got in the way." She smiled, sad. "It always does." He took a sip of tea. It was too sweet. Or maybe it was just the lump in his throat. "You're still the only person who ever made me feel like I wasn't drowning," he whispered. "Even when you had nothing." Sophie looked at him, eyes softening. "I had everything that night." The clock ticked. Somewhere in the bedroom, Ava hummed. "I want to be in her life," he said. "I don't want to disrupt yours. I don't want to take over. But if there's space, I'd like to be her father." Sophie didn't speak. He kept going. "Not just in name. I want to know what she likes. What scares her. What books she reads. I want to go to her school recitals, even if she sings off-key. I want her to know she has someone who will show up." "You can't disappear again," Sophie said. "I won't. She'll ask you to stay the night. Not today. But soon. She'll paint you pictures and ask why the stars don't fall. You'll make promises. I'll keep them. And if one day, she calls you Dad." He looked her in the eye. "I'll cry like a child." Sophie nodded slowly. "Then we'll take it one step at a time." He leaned back in his chair, tears caught at the corner of his eyes. "That's more than I ever thought I'd get." Sophie stood, walked to the bedroom, and came back holding something small. It was a tiny shoe. Blue, with Velcro straps. A baby's first walker. "She wore this on her first birthday," Sophie said. "She kept falling down. But she never gave up." Richard took it, his fingers trembling. "She's strong. She gets that from her father." And for the first time, he believed that was him. Even if he hadn't earned it yet. He hadn't planned to come again so soon. But something about the quiet of his penthouse had become unbearable. The echo of silence, the untouched food, the untouched life, it all felt like a museum exhibit of a man he no longer wanted to be. So Richard found himself standing once more in front of Sophie's door, clutching a book wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red string Ava might like to untangle. He knocked twice, the way Ava had knocked on the table for more spaghetti the night before. It was funny how quickly rhythms changed, how fast they became vital. Sophie opened the door, surprised but not displeased. "You're early," she said, her hair loosely tied, a soft cardigan falling over her shoulder like she'd thrown it on last minute. "I know," he admitted. "But I missed her. I missed both of you." Sophie hesitated, then stepped aside. "She's still sleeping. It's Saturday." He nodded and followed her in. The apartment smelled of toast and something sweet, vanilla or cinnamon. It reminded him of his mother's kitchen, before memories turned bitter and time rewrote the walls. They sat at the table again, but this time the silence was gentler. Sophie poured tea without asking, and he smiled, noticing it wasn't too sweet anymore. She remembered. "She talks about you," Sophie said, stirring slowly. She asked if the man who brought the whale was a magician. "I'm flattered." She said only someone magical would know she's always wanted a blue whale. Richard's breath caught. He hadn't known. He had just chosen something with a smile he liked. Fate had a funny way of winking. "I brought her something else," he said, handing over the wrapped package. "It's not new. It was mine. My favorite book when I was her age." Sophie unwrapped it carefully. "The Little Prince." She might not understand all of it now, but the parts she does, she'll remember. Sophie traced the cover. "It's beautiful." She She is too, he said, softly. Their eyes met. And held. There was a shift. Small. But real. Just then, a soft thud echoed from the bedroom, followed by the patter of small feet and a groggy voice. Mum. Ava rubbed her eyes, her hair a wild crown of curls, and stopped when she saw Richard. She blinked. Then beamed. You came back. I did, he smiled. Good morning, sunshine. She ran to him without hesitation, curling into his lap like she belonged there. Like there'd never been a time she hadn't. He held her, unsure how something so small could fill a void so large. They spent the morning drawing whales and stars and cupcakes. Ava declared him terrible at coloring within the lines. He agreed. Sophie watched from the kitchen, a quiet joy softening her face. After lunch, Richard stood by the window while Ava napped, the city stretching outside like a promise. You're good with her, Sophie said, her voice closer than he expected. I didn't think I would be. I thought I'd feel fake. You don't. He turned. How can you be so sure? Because she laughs more now. And you're not wearing the same mask anymore. He swallowed. I want to be better. I'm trying. But I don't even know what being a good father looks like. Maybe it just looks like showing up. He nodded, but his eyes were tired. There were things he hadn't said. Wounds deeper than money could reach. Sophie noticed. What is it? There's something you don't know, he said, each word dragging behind the next. The night I left, the first time. It wasn't just fear. It wasn't just me being a coward. She sat, bracing herself. I was married, he confessed. Or at least, I had been. My wife had died a year before I met you. And I wasn't done grieving. But I lied. I pretended I was ready. That I could love again. Sophie didn't move. You reminded me of hope. And I was selfish. I should have told you. But I didn't want to lose the light. And then, when I felt it slipping, I ran. The room felt colder. I thought you didn't care, she whispered. I thought I meant nothing. You meant too much. That was the problem. Silence settled between them. Heavy. Honest. I hated you, she admitted. For a long time. Not because you left. But because you never explained. I didn't know how. She stood, walked toward the shelf, and pulled out a small notebook. It was old, the edges worn. She handed it to him. What's this? I wrote to you. Every time Ava asked about her father, I wrote to the man I used to believe in. He opened it. Pages filled with ink, sorrow, and love. Questions. Wishes. Wounds turned into words. I don't deserve this, he said, tears prickling his eyes. No. But you came back. That has to count for something. They stood quietly, the distance between them finally starting to thaw. Outside, rain began tapping the window like fingers searching for warmth. I want to keep coming back, he said. Every day, if you'll let me. Sophie nodded slowly. Then we'll start from here. Not from the lies. Not from the loss. But from now. Richard sat beside her, notebook still open on his lap, and whispered, I think she already knows. Somewhere in her heart, that I was always supposed to be hers. And she, Sophie said gently, was always supposed to be yours. The next few days unfolded like a memory trying to become real again. Richard came by almost every evening, never overstaying, never assuming. He brought books. Puzzles. A telescope one night, just so Ava could look for the stars he told her were whispering her name. Sophie watched him carefully, the way one watches a houseplant slowly coming back to life after nearly giving up on it. But still, something lingered behind Richard's eyes. Not just guilt, something older. Something he hadn't named out loud. That came on a Thursday. Ava had fallen asleep on the couch with crayon-stained fingers and her favorite stuffed whale tucked under her chin. Richard stood in the hallway, unsure if he should go, or wait, or say what had been rattling inside him. Sophie leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed gently, as if she already sensed the storm before the thunder. "I keep seeing her," he said, voice low. "My late wife." Sophie didn't flinch. She just nodded, letting him speak. She had this way of sitting in silence, like you do. Like it wasn't empty. Just peaceful. He ran a hand through his hair. "When she died, I stopped looking at people. Stopped seeing them. I was afraid that if I let anyone in, they'd disappear too." Sophie's voice was soft but steady. "You don't have to explain. Grief makes us strangers to ourselves." He looked at her. "But I want to explain. To you. To her. To Ava. Because I need you to know, my absence wasn't because you were forgettable. It was because I remembered too much. And I was too weak to live with it." Sophie stepped forward. "And now? I'm tired of being afraid of ghosts," he whispered. "But I'm terrified of becoming one in Ava's life." For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the rise and fall of Ava's sleeping breath. Sophie walked toward the bookshelf and pulled down a small frame. Inside was a photo, Sophie holding Ava as a baby, both blurry and smiling under a cloudy sky. "This," she said, handing it to him, "is the only thing that reminded me to keep trying when she asked about you. Because even if you were gone, she came from something beautiful." Richard took the photo, fingers trembling. "She's more than I deserve. She's more than either of us expected," Sophie said. "But maybe that's the point." He looked at the photo again. "There's something else I never told you." She waited. "The night we met, it wasn't an accident." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "What do you mean?" "I saw you days before. You were at that bookstore on 5th. Sitting on the floor, reading to a child. Not yours. Just, reading. And the way you spoke, like every word mattered, I'd never seen anyone do that before. I went back the next day, but you weren't there. I kept walking past that place, hoping to see you again. When I finally did, at the train station, I followed you." Sophie's breath caught. "You followed me?" "Not in a creepy way," he added quickly, almost ashamed. "I just couldn't help it. I felt like something was pulling me. And I wasn't used to feeling pulled by anything other than numbers or board meetings." She sat down, slowly. "You never told me. I wanted it to be chance. I wanted it to be innocent. But the truth is, I was already falling for you before I even knew your name." Sophie looked at the floor, then back at him. "So what happened? You found me, you loved me, and then you left. I saw the test." Her eyebrows lifted. "What?" "That night. At your apartment. The positive pregnancy test on the bathroom counter. I didn't tell you. I just panicked. All my grief, all my fear, it came crashing in. I saw your future with me, and I saw how broken I was. And I thought, if I stay, I'll ruin her. I'll ruin both of them." Tears pricked Sophie's eyes now, uninvited. "So you chose to ruin us by leaving?" He nodded, ashamed. "I thought it was mercy. It wasn't. I know." The silence that followed was not cold, it was full of things neither of them had ever dared say aloud. Sophie walked to the window, staring out at the dim lights of the street. He followed, standing just close enough to hear her breathe. "I don't want to rewrite the past," she said. "But I need to know, if Ava never called you Dad, would you have still come back?" He hesitated, then answered with raw honesty. I don't know. But I'm grateful she did. Because now I can't imagine walking away again. Sophie turned, searching his face. And what if she calls someone else that name one day? I'll still be here, he said. I'll still love her. Her eyes shimmered, but she held them steady. You know this doesn't fix everything. I don't want to fix it. I just want to be worthy of the next chapter. At that moment, Ava stirred on the couch, murmured something in her sleep, and turned over, her hand dangling down, reaching unconsciously for someone to hold. Richard stepped forward, knelt beside her, and gently took her hand. She dreams better when she's not alone, Sophie said. He smiled, brushing a curl from Ava's cheek. So do I. And from the corner of her throat, just before she walked into the kitchen to give herself space to feel everything all at once, Sophie whispered something not meant to be heard. But he did. I missed you too. It was supposed to be just another night. Richard sat alone in his penthouse office, the skyline behind him glowing with the cold lights of the city he used to command like a king. But tonight, he felt like a man who had just discovered he no longer ruled anything, not even his own memories. He couldn't get her voice out of his head. Not Sophie's. The little ones. Ava's. You're my dad, right? The innocence in her tone was sharp enough to cut him open from the inside. The past few weeks had unraveled him in ways no merger or hostile takeover ever could. He'd spent his life protecting assets, securing futures. But he had no idea how to protect a memory that refused to stay buried. A memory that had now become a living, breathing child with eyes he couldn't stop seeing in every mirror he passed. He opened a drawer in his desk. At the very bottom, wrapped in a faded silk cloth, was a photo. A woman and a man on a rainy street corner. She was laughing, head tilted back, rain caught in her eyelashes. He was looking at her like she was the only light in a city that never slept. He remembered that moment like it had been taken seconds ago. He stared at the image, then flipped it over. Written in handwriting he'd once memorized like scripture, "Don't forget this." Because I won't. He hadn't forgotten. He'd buried it. Suddenly, there was a knock. He startled, quickly wiping his eyes before calling out. It was Henry, his oldest assistant. Not the kind who came with spreadsheets. The kind who knew where the bodies, emotional and otherwise, were buried. You all right, sir? Henry asked, stepping in slowly. Richard nodded too quickly. Fine. Henry raised an eyebrow. You sure? You look like someone saw a ghost and realized it was still breathing. Richard didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the photo. How long have you known? Henry stepped closer, eyes softening. About the girl? About Sophie? Since the fundraiser 6 years ago. I saw the way you looked at her. And I saw the way you stopped looking at anything after she disappeared. Richard's shoulders sagged. I don't know what to do, Henry. Well, Henry said, you could start by asking the right question. Not what to do, but why you didn't do it back then. That night, Richard didn't go home. He went walking. Down past the park where she once said she felt safest. Past the bookstore where she used to take the children she tutored. Past the corner where he first saw her smile at a stranger like she'd known him her whole life. And finally, he stopped outside a familiar building. Sophie's apartment was above a tiny bakery. The lights were off, but the hallway bulb flickered dimly. He stood outside her door for what felt like an hour. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached into his coat pocket and placed the photo in front of her door. He didn't knock. He didn't call. He just walked away. The next morning, Sophie found it. When Richard arrived at the office, she was waiting in the lobby. She didn't say anything right away. Just handed him the photo. You kept this? She asked. I never stopped seeing it, he answered. She looked like she hadn't slept. But she was calm, calmer than he deserved. I want to know the truth, she said. All of it. Not just the version that makes you feel less guilty. He nodded. And for the next 2 hours, in his office with the door locked and the city silence behind thick glass, he told her everything. About the night he left. About the fear that paralyzed him. About the mistake he made when he convinced himself she and the baby would be better off without him. Sophie didn't cry. She didn't yell. But her eyes did something far worse. They dulled. Like hope was something she had packed away long ago and didn't have the strength to unpack. When I found out I was pregnant, she said finally, I wasn't scared. I was proud. Because I thought, somewhere out there, was a man who had once looked at me like I was the only real thing in the world. And maybe one day, I could show our child that kind of love, even if you never came back. He bowed his head. I failed you both. She tilted her head. Do you still think you have to earn the right to be in her life? I don't know what I think anymore. She studied him. Then let me be clear. You can't earn a child's love. You just show up. Again and again and again. He looked at her with new eyes, eyes that saw not just who she was now, but who she had been all along, resilient, brave, and painfully human. I want to be there, he said. Even if she never calls me Dad again. Even if she forgets that moment ever happened. She won't, Sophie said softly. But that's not the point. The point is, what are you going to do now? He stood. I'll show up. And he did. Later that evening, he arrived at their building with a bag full of Ava's favorite things, puzzles, jelly beans, and a new coloring book. Ava opened the door and stared at him for a long second. Then she smiled. You came back. He knelt. I always should have. She held up a drawing. 3 stick figures. One small, one tall, and one with curly hair just like Sophie's. I made us, Ava said. Richard took it with shaking hands, eyes welling up again. I love it, he whispered. Sophie watched from the kitchen, eyes softer now. In that moment, she realized something. Forgiveness wasn't always a grand gesture. Sometimes it was just letting someone step into the light after years of standing in the shadows. And as Richard sat cross-legged on the floor with Ava, helping her pick out crayon colors, Sophie walked over and sat down beside them. Maybe they weren't rewriting the past. But they were, at long last, beginning a new page, together. The next few days passed like a dream Richard was afraid to wake up from. For the first time in years, he began leaving the office before sunset. He learned how to kneel without creaking, how to braid a doll's hair without snapping its head off, and how to listen when Ava spoke, not just to her words, but to the silence in between. That silence was where her pain lived, quietly, like a shadow cast by someone she barely remembered but desperately wanted to know. Sophie watched them carefully. She was kind, but cautious. She'd seen Richard disappear once before, vanish like a man who had never truly existed. And though he was here now, fully present, showing up for dinners and puzzles and bedtime stories, she couldn't silence the voice in her own mind that asked, how long this time? One evening, after Ava had fallen asleep mid-sentence during a story about talking cats and chocolate trees, Richard tucked the blanket around her shoulders and turned toward the door. Sophie was waiting in the hallway, arms folded. She's never asked where you went, Sophie said. Not once. Isn't that strange? Richard shook his head. No. Kids don't ask where love went. They just keep hoping it finds its way back. Sophie's eyes softened. And when it does? He answered carefully. You try to prove to them it's not going anywhere again. She exhaled. I want to believe you. He stepped closer, his voice low. Then tell me what you need. There was a long pause. Then, without looking at him, she said, I need to know the truth. Not the polished version. Not the guilt-ridden apology. The truth. I need to know why you left, Richard. What happened back then that made you walk away from me, from her? He sat down on the old wooden bench by the window. It wasn't because I didn't love you. God, that's the one thing I was sure of. But I was scared. You were this bright, messy burst of life. And I was already fading, Sophie. I didn't think I could be what you needed. What she would need. I thought leaving was the only way to save you from the worst version of me. Sophie sat beside him. But you didn't save me. You broke me. I know, he whispered. And I broke myself, too. They sat in silence, the room dim except for the light spilling from Ava's nightlight down the hallway. Then Sophie pulled something from her pocket, a folded piece of paper, old and creased. I wrote this the week after you left, she said. I never sent it. Richard took it with trembling hands. He read it slowly. Her words were raw, angry, full of heartbreak, but beneath it all was one line that gutted him. I don't hate you. I just wish you'd stayed long enough to know what it felt like to be a father. He looked at her. You kept this all these years? I kept it because I needed to remember what strength looked like. I raised her alone, Richard. Every fever. Every scraped knee. Every birthday. I was there. And it nearly killed me to pretend that you never existed. I never stopped existing for you, he said, barely breathing. No, she replied. But you disappeared in her world. And now she calls you Dad. And I wonder if she even knows what that word should mean. His heart clenched. Then let me show her. Let me earn that word. She met his eyes. It won't be easy. I don't expect it to be. She hesitated. Then said quietly, there's something else. He waited. She's sick, Richard. Not seriously, at least, we hope not. But she has seizures sometimes. The doctors aren't sure why. They say it might be neurological, might be genetic. We've run tests, but there are blanks in her file. Gaps only you can fill. The breath caught in his throat. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't know if I could trust you to stay. I'm not going anywhere, he said, voice cracking. Not again. I'll sign anything, take every test, whatever she needs. Whatever you need. She nodded. All right. Then start tomorrow. Her next appointment is at 10. The next morning, Richard sat beside Ava in the pediatric neurologist's office, holding her small hand while she swung her legs impatiently. She was scared but tried to act brave. He admired that about her. She reminded him so much of Sophie, tough and fragile in the same breath. The doctor entered and gave them a tight smile. We'll just run a few more scans today. But Mr. Langston, we'll need a full medical history from you as well. He nodded, pulling out a completed questionnaire. It's all here. Every illness, every allergy, even the weird birthmark I have behind my left knee. The doctor laughed softly. Perfect. That's exactly the kind of detail we need. While Ava was led away for her scans, Richard sat in the hallway beside Sophie. He felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders like armor. But this time, he didn't want to shrug it off. He wanted to wear it, bear it, for her, for Ava, for all the years he had lost. She doesn't know yet, Sophie said. What? About the tests. About the possibility something's wrong. I didn't want her to be afraid. She's stronger than both of us, Richard replied. But you were right. She needs to know love doesn't vanish when things get hard. They sat in silence again, their hands almost touching. Later, as they walked out of the hospital, Ava bounded ahead, twirling in her oversized coat, unaware of the world trembling behind her. Richard stopped Sophie at the edge of the sidewalk. I'm not asking to fix everything. I just want the chance to be part of this life we could have had. Even if it's messy now. Even if it's harder. Sophie looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, the lines around her eyes softened. Then show up tomorrow. And the day after. And the day after that. He smiled. I will. As Ava turned and waved at them, the streetlight overhead flickered to life, casting a soft glow over the three of them. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean or easy. But maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something real. And this time, he wouldn't let it slip away. The rain had returned, soft and persistent, tapping against the wide glass panels of his penthouse like a memory refusing to be forgotten. Nathan stood alone in the vast silence of the living room, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that once offered him the world. Now they reflected only his emptiness. The city lights blinked below, indifferent to the storm inside him. He held the photograph in trembling hands. It was the same one Harper had dropped when she walked away from him in that park. A little girl stood in a sunbeam, squinting, laughing, one front tooth missing. She held a man's hand, Nathan's hand. Only, back then, he hadn't known. His eyes were red-rimmed from sleepless nights and searching days. He had visited every cafe she might have worked at, asked every delivery service, even gone to the old community center she once mentioned in passing. No one had seen her. Or if they had, they didn't tell him. Maybe they were protecting her. Maybe they saw in him a man who had everything but failed at the one thing that mattered. He poured himself a drink and sat on the edge of the couch, staring blankly at the untouched liquor. It felt wrong now, like a relic from another life, a man he didn't want to return to. His tie was loose around his neck, his sleeves rolled up, as if peeling back layers of pride and power might help him feel closer to the truth. I was never supposed to be her father, he whispered to no one, but she made me feel like I already was. The memory of Harper's voice haunted him. The way her small hands had clenched when she called him Dad for the first time. Not because someone told her to. Not because it was written in some legal file. But because she felt it. And he hadn't stopped her. That moment had shattered him more than any boardroom betrayal, more than any hostile takeover or lawsuit. This was a soul fracture, a fault line that split him open. He reached for his phone. Again. No missed calls. No messages. He scrolled through the photos he had secretly saved, each one taken from afar during those weeks he spent watching her from a distance, too afraid to intervene, too late to claim a right he hadn't earned. Her walking home with Harper. Laughing at a grocery store. Reading in the park. Living a life without him. But it was the photo Harper had drawn for a school project, one he'd retrieved from the community center bulletin board, that finally broke him. It was crayon on cardboard. A simple drawing. A stick figure girl. A tall man beside her, holding an umbrella over both their heads. Above it, in shaky letters, "My dad protects me even when I don't see him." He couldn't breathe. That night, he called a driver, but then changed his mind. He wanted to walk. In the rain. In the dark. With only guilt and longing to keep him company. The streets whispered stories of them, places they might have passed, alleys where she may have run as a child, corners where his decisions once echoed louder than her needs. He ended up at the old bookstore where they first met. It had changed hands, now a cafe with mismatched chairs and overpriced tea, but the bell above the door still jingled the same. He sat near the window, hoping fate would walk in, soaked and unsure, needing shelter just as she once had. But the door never opened. The next morning, he called Claire, the only person who might still have a thread leading to her. Claire was silent on the other end of the line. Then finally, she said, "You should have been there from the beginning. But I'll tell you where she went. Not because you deserve it, but because Harper does." He wrote down the address, heart pounding, fingers shaking. It was a small town by the coast, hours away. No airports. No hotels. Just people who knew each other by first name and sunsets that wrapped around the ocean like lullabies. He drove. 4 hours. Through rain and wind. Through every version of himself he once was. The CEO. The loner. The coward. The fool. By the time he arrived, the clouds had cleared, and the ocean gleamed in that quiet way the truth does when it finally settles into place. He found the cottage easily. It was small, with chipped paint and a porch swing that creaked. He didn't knock. He couldn't. Instead, he stood by the wooden fence, watching through the cracks. Harper was there. Barefoot in the yard, hair in a ponytail, chasing bubbles. Her laughter was a song. And then, she saw him. Their eyes met. She didn't run. She didn't smile. She just stared, frozen. And then, slowly, she walked toward him. He knelt. His hands trembled again. "Hi," he said, voice rough, unworthy. She didn't say anything. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. On it, a stick figure drawing she had once made. He had copied it. Memorized it. Loved it. "I don't know if I ever deserve to be called Dad," he whispered, tears threatening to fall, "but if you'll let me, I'd like to try again." She looked at the drawing. Then at him. Then she asked softly, "Do you still protect me, even when I don't see you?" He nodded. She stepped forward. And for the first time in weeks, maybe ever, she hugged him. And the world, for just a moment, felt whole again. Nathan didn't move. Not at first. He was afraid the slightest shift might shatter the moment into 1,000 fragile memories. Harper's small arms were wrapped tightly around his neck, her face buried against his shoulder, as if the hug had been waiting inside her all along. It wasn't the kind of hug that asked questions. It was the kind that answered them. His hands slowly came up to hold her, careful like a man touching something sacred. And maybe he was. From behind the screen door of the cottage, a shadow appeared, Elena. She stood still, one hand on the frame, the other pressed lightly over her heart. Her eyes were wide, glassy, unsure. There were so many things she could say. Accusations. Warnings. Please. But in that moment, she didn't say a word. Because she saw what she never thought she would, her daughter choosing a man she once believed had abandoned them. Harper stepped back, just enough to look up at him. "Did you really look for me? All this time?" He nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. She placed her tiny palm over his heart, right above where it hurt the most. "Then I think I remember you too," she whispered. Elena finally stepped outside. Her bare feet touched the wooden porch with a hesitant grace, the kind a person walks with when their past and future collide in the same breath. Nathan rose slowly, wiping at his eyes with the sleeve of a $1,000 suit that now meant nothing. "Elena," he said, her name breaking like a prayer from lips too long sealed by silence. She didn't run. Didn't shout. She simply looked at him with the eyes of a woman who had carried too much and survived anyway. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she said softly. "I never meant to disappear," he replied, voice trembling. "I didn't know what I was walking away from, until the moment I realized I couldn't walk back." They stood facing each other with years between them. Years filled with questions and regrets. Misunderstandings that festered. Choices made in fear. But also moments, small, undeniable moments, when the universe tried to bring them back. Elena glanced down at Harper, then back at Nathan. "She doesn't need another heartbreak. If you're going to be here, you better mean it." "I do," he said without hesitation. "I've never meant anything more." She nodded once, slow and uncertain, but not cold. "Then come in. But only as a man, not a savior. We're not broken. Just unfinished." Inside the cottage, the world was smaller but fuller. Wooden floors creaked with memories. A drawing of a lighthouse was taped to the fridge. The couch was covered in mismatched blankets, a tea kettle whistled in the background, and a cat meowed somewhere unseen. It was not the life of luxury Nathan had once offered, but it was warm and real. They sat at the small kitchen table, Harper between them, swinging her legs without a care in the world. The sun streamed through the windows, painting golden lines across her hair. Elena poured tea, then paused. "There's something you should see." She walked into the back room and returned with a shoebox. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. All written in the same handwriting. All addressed to Nathan. None sent. "I wrote one every year," she said, placing the box gently in front of him. "On Harper's birthday. After her first word. When she lost her first tooth. When she got scared during a thunderstorm. I just couldn't send them. I didn't know if you'd read them. Or if you even remembered us." He opened the top letter. It was dated 5 years ago. "She drew this one," Elena added. He unfolded the page. A lopsided heart. Inside it, the words, "I hope you're nice." That broke him. Not the lawsuits. Not the loneliness. Not the collapse of empires. This. He turned to Elena. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't even expect Harper to fully understand. But if you'll let me, I want to be in her life. Not as a billionaire, not as some ghost from the past, but as a man who finally understands what it means to love without condition." Elena looked at him, long and hard. Then, for the first time since he'd found them, she smiled. It was tired, yes. But real. "We'll go slow," she said. "You'll learn her favorite stories. Her quirks. Her nightmares. You'll show up for her dance recitals and ice cream cravings. And when she asks about the past, we tell her the truth. Together." Nathan reached for Harper's hand. She curled her fingers around his without hesitation. Later that evening, they went for a walk along the shore. Harper collected shells and handed him each one like a treasure. Elena walked beside him, arms folded, occasionally brushing against his side like waves testing the tide. As the sun dipped low, casting orange fire across the sky, Harper looked up and said, "Daddy, can we stay here forever?" Nathan's breath caught. Not because she called him that again, but because it no longer felt like a borrowed word. He looked at Elena. She looked back. And in the unspoken space between them, the past forgave the present. "We'll stay as long as it takes," he said, lifting Harper into his arms. "Because sometimes, the family you were never meant to have, is the one you were always meant to fight for." And this time, he wouldn't walk away.